It was an evening designed for humiliation. For Aria Jensen, returning to the Harrington family mansion felt like walking back into her own beautifully decorated prison. Her ex-husband Nathaniel and his formidable mother Genevieve had summoned her for a family dinner. A cruel charade of civility. A single chair deliberately removed from the grand dining table was her intended throne of shame. They wanted to show her exactly what she had lost: a place at their table, a name, a future. But they never imagined the man who would arrive at their door minutes later. They never imagined his briefcase held a secret that would not just offer Aria a seat, but the power to buy the whole damn table and the entire dynasty along with it. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, nestled mockingly between a final notice electricity bill and a postcard from a community art fair. The cardstock was so thick it felt like a tiny slab of marble, cream-colored, with the Harrington family crest, a severe-looking eagle clutching a bundle of arrows embossed in gold at the top. The calligraphy was perfect, each loop and swish a testament to expensive, unhurried craftsmanship. It requested the pleasure of Aria Jensen's company for a family dinner. Aria had laughed a short, sharp, bitter sound that echoed in her small, paint-spattered apartment. The place always smelled faintly of turpentine and linseed oil, a scent she found comforting, a scent the Harringtons had always called the stench of her little hobby. A family dinner. The audacity was breathtaking. It had been 2 years since the divorce, 2 years since she had been surgically and efficiently excised from the Harrington family photograph. 2 years of rebuilding a life from the scratchy, impoverished canvas they had left her with. Why now? Her first instinct was to burn it, to watch the elegant script turn to black ash and float away over the fire escape. But a small, treacherous part of her, a part she thought she had starved to death, felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. Maybe Nathaniel felt remorse. Maybe after 2 years with his hand-picked, pedigreed fiancée Beatrice Vanderbilt, he realized what he had thrown away. It was a stupid romantic notion, the kind that had gotten her into this mess in the first place. She remembered meeting Nathaniel at a gallery opening. He had been different from the other men in tailored suits. He had looked at her paintings, not just her. He'd listened, truly listened, when she spoke of color theory and emotional expression. He had seemed like a man who could straddle 2 worlds, the rarefied air of his Upper East Side upbringing and the messy, vibrant world of her art. For a few years he had. He'd championed her work, even buying a small studio for her. But the pressure from his mother Genevieve was a constant eroding force. Genevieve Harrington was the matriarch in the truest, most terrifying sense of the word. She ran the family and its multi-generational shipping fortune, Harrington Global, with an iron will and a gaze that could freeze steam. To Genevieve, Aria was a stain on their lineage. She was a Jensen, the daughter of a librarian and a high school history teacher. She had no name, no connections, no dowry that could be leveraged into a corporate merger. Her art was a frivolous pastime, not a career. Genevieve made her disapproval known not through loud confrontations, but through 1,000 tiny cuts, a backhanded compliment about Aria's quaint dress sense, a conveniently forgotten invitation to a charity gala, the constant weary sighs whenever Aria spoke of her family. The divorce had been Genevieve's masterpiece. She had manufactured a public narrative of an amicable split, all while ensuring the prenuptial agreement Aria had signed in a haze of love left her with almost nothing. The studio was taken away, deemed a gift conditional to the marriage. Aria was left with a meager settlement that barely covered 2 years' rent on her tiny apartment, a deliberate calculation to force her back to the obscurity from which she came. And now this dinner. Her best friend, a sculptor named Chloe, had been unequivocal. "Don't go, Aude," she'd pleaded over the phone. "It's a trap. They want something, or worse, they want to gloat. Genevieve doesn't do anything without a strategic objective. This isn't a dinner, it's a corporate maneuver." Aria knew Chloe was right. And yet, that flicker of hope, that masochistic need for closure, for one last look at the life that had been hers, gnawed at her. "I have to," Aria had said, her voice small. "I have to know why. And I have to show them I'm not broken." So on Friday evening, Aria stood before the meager selection of clothes in her closet. She bypassed the paint-stained jeans and comfortable sweaters. She pulled out the one weapon she had left from her old life, a simple dark teal dress. It was an understated designer piece she'd bought herself with the proceeds from a small commission, one of the few things she truly owned from that time. It was elegant, severe, and professional. It was armor. She did her own hair and makeup, her hands steady. She wasn't the blushing, naive girl who had first walked into the Harrington mansion anymore. She was a 32-year-old woman who knew how to patch a leaking faucet, how to stretch a dollar until it screamed, and how to face down the condescending gaze of a gallery owner who thought her work was too emotional. The taxi ride to the Upper East Side felt like a journey through a time portal. The gritty, vibrant chaos of her neighborhood gave way to the hushed, monolithic perfection of theirs. Brownstones the size of museums lined streets so clean they seemed scrubbed. When the taxi pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Harrington estate, the security guard peered at her, his face a mixture of confusion and suspicion, before his earpiece crackled and the gate swung silently open. The house was just as she remembered, a limestone behemoth that seemed to suck the very light from the sky. It wasn't a home. It was a statement of untouchable power. As she walked up the stone steps, the massive oak doors were opened by a butler she didn't recognize. He looked her up and down with a practiced neutrality that was more insulting than a sneer. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice flat. "They are waiting for you in the drawing room." He led her through the grand foyer, her sensible heels clicking on the black and white marble floor. The air was cold and smelled of lemon polish and old money. On the walls hung ancestral portraits of stern-faced Harringtons, their painted eyes seeming to follow her, judging her. Nothing had changed. It was a mausoleum to a family's self-importance, and she was the ghost of a past they were trying to bury. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face the lions. The drawing room was a cavern of mahogany and silk, dominated by a vast fireplace, where a carefully controlled fire burned without a single wisp of smoke. Genevieve was standing by the mantelpiece, a flute of champagne in her hand, looking as if she had been carved from ice. She wore a Chanel suit the color of bone, her silver hair coiled in a perfect, formidable chignon. Beside her, Beatrice Vanderbilt was practically vibrating with smug triumph. Beatrice was everything Aria was not. Her blonde hair was glossy and perfect. Her jewelry was ostentatiously large, and her laughter was a high, tinkling sound designed to grate on the nerves. Nathaniel stood slightly apart from them, looking uncomfortable. He saw Aria, and his face flickered with a complex mixture of guilt and something else, pity perhaps, which was far worse. He looked thinner than she remembered, the easy smile she had loved now replaced by a permanent, anxious line around his mouth. "Aria Genevieve," said, her voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. She didn't move to greet her. "How adequate you look." "Genevieve Aria," replied, her tone even. She refused to let them see her tremble. "So glad you could make it," Beatrice trilled, stepping forward to offer a limp, insincere handshake. Her diamond engagement ring, a rock the size of a small bird's egg, caught the light and seemed to mock Aria's bare fingers. "We were just saying how brave it was of you to come." The word brave was a dagger disguised as a compliment. It implied Aria was an object of pity, a soldier returning to the battlefield where she had been vanquished. Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice strained. "Aria, you look well." "I am well, Nathaniel," she said, meeting his eyes directly. She wanted him to see that she had survived him, that she had survived them. The butler reappeared. "Dinner is served, madam." Genevieve nodded, her gaze sweeping over Aria one last time. "Excellent. Let us proceed to the dining room." She led the way, a queen leading her court. Beatrice hooked her arm through Nathaniel's, pulling him along, whispering something in his ear that made him flush. Aria followed behind them, a lone satellite in their familial orbit, feeling the weight of the ancestral portraits on her back. The dining room was even more intimidating than the drawing room. The table, a single polished slab of dark wood that could comfortably seat 20, was set for 4. Or rather, it was almost set for 4. 3 places were immaculately arranged with a dizzying array of silverware, crystal glasses, and fine china bearing the Harrington crest. The fourth spot at the far end of the table opposite Genevieve was conspicuously bare. But that wasn't where she was meant to sit. Off to the side, near a large potted fern and almost out of the main candlelight, was a small circular cafe table. It was the kind of table one might find in a breakfast nook. It was set with a single plain plate, one fork, one knife, and a simple water glass. It was an island of insignificance in an ocean of opulence. Aria stopped dead in the doorway. The blood drained from her face, then rushed back with a hot, furious roar in her ears. This was it. This was the reason for the invitation. It wasn't about closure or reconciliation. It was a calculated theatrical act of cruelty. They had brought her here to physically manifest her exclusion, to make her sit at a child's table while the adults feasted. Genevieve turned, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. "Ah, Aria, my apologies. There was a last-minute change to the seating arrangement. Beatrice's father decided he may join us later, and we had to keep a seat free at the main table, just in case. I do hope you don't mind. We found this little spot for you. You'll still be able to hear our conversation, of course." The lie was so bald-faced, so insulting in its lack of effort. They hadn't even bothered to invent a plausible excuse. Beatrice chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh dear, it looks a bit lonely over there, doesn't it? Don't worry, we'll be sure to talk loudly so you feel included." Aria's eyes shot to Nathaniel. His face was pale and he wouldn't meet her gaze. He was staring intently at the pattern on the Persian rug, a coward in a $1,000 suit. In that moment, the last vestiges of love and affection she held for him withered and died, turning to ash in her chest. He was watching this happen. He was letting it happen. For a split second, she considered her options. She could sit at the small table, enduring their snide remarks and pitying glances, eating her meal in silent humiliation. She could make a scene, scream at them for their cruelty, and give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Or she could do what she should have done the moment the invitation arrived. She took a slow, deliberate breath, calming the tremor in her hands. She looked directly at Genevieve, her voice low and clear, cutting through the thick, self-satisfied air of the room. "No, thank you, Genevieve," she said. The politeness of her words was a weapon in itself. "I won't be staying." Genevieve's eyebrows arched. "Don't be difficult, Aria. It's just a chair." "It's never just a chair with you," Aria replied, a new cold strength filling her. "It's a message. And I've received it loud and clear. For 2 years I have tried to forget the cruelty and condescension of this family. Thank you for this vivid reminder of why I left. Enjoy your dinner." She turned her back on them, on the shocking, sputtering face of Beatrice, on the cold fury in Genevieve's eyes, and on the pathetic, downcast face of the man she once loved. She walked, not ran, out of the dining room, her head held high. Each click of her heels on the marble floor was a declaration of her own worth. She would not be diminished. She would not be their entertainment. As she reached the grand foyer, the front door loomed ahead like the gateway to freedom. She was just a few feet away when the heavy oak door swung inward. Standing on the threshold was a man she had never seen before. He was in his late 60s, with a sharp, intelligent face, silver hair, and piercing blue eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a perfectly tailored but slightly rumpled suit and held a worn leather briefcase. He looked utterly out of place in the Harringtons' sterile mansion, like a character from a classic black-and-white film who had wandered onto the wrong set. He blinked, surprised to see her. "Pardon me, miss. I have an appointment with the Harrington family." Before Aria could respond, Genevieve's sharp voice echoed from the dining room entrance. "Who is it?" "We are not expecting anyone else." The man stepped into the foyer, his presence commanding a strange, quiet authority. "My name is Jonathan Finch," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I am an attorney. I'm afraid I bring some rather urgent news." Genevieve swept into the foyer, her face a mask of irritation. The carefully orchestrated humiliation of Aria had been interrupted, and she did not appreciate loose threads in her tapestries of power. Nathaniel and Beatrice followed in her wake, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. "Mr. Finch," Genevieve said, her tone making it clear she had no idea who he was and no desire to learn. "As you can see, we are in the middle of a private dinner. Whatever this is, it can surely wait until business hours." Mr. Finch did not seem intimidated. He possessed a stillness that was unnerving, the quiet confidence of a man who held all the cards. "I'm afraid it cannot, Mrs. Harrington. My news concerns your brother Silas Whitmore." The name hung in the air, instantly changing the atmosphere in the foyer. Silas Whitmore, the black sheep of the family, Genevieve's estranged older brother. While Genevieve had married into the Harrington shipping empire, consolidating old money with more old money, Silas had been the iconoclast. A certified genius with a disdain for social niceties, he had taken a small inheritance and, through a series of stunningly prescient investments in nascent technology and biotechnology in the 80s and 90s, built an empire that dwarfed the Harrington fortune. He was a recluse, a phantom who was spoken of in whispers at family gatherings. The mad, brilliant billionaire who hadn't spoken to his sister in over 30 years. Genevieve's composure cracked just for a second. A flicker of something greed anticipation crossed her face before being smoothed over with a mask of performative concern. Silas. What about him? Has he finally decided to come to his senses and reconcile with his family? Mr. Finch's expression remained somber. He looked from Genevieve to Nathaniel, then his eyes rested for a moment on Aria, who stood frozen near the door, an unwilling spectator to this new drama. "I am Silas Whitmore's personal attorney and the executor of his estate," Mr. Finch stated, his words precise and devoid of emotion. "It is my sad duty to inform you that Mr. Whitmore passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 nights ago at his home in Geneva." A stunned silence filled the grand foyer. Beatrice gasped theatrically, placing a hand on her chest. Nathaniel looked genuinely shocked. Genevieve, however, was a master of control. She allowed a single perfect tear to well in her eye before dabbing it away with a delicate finger. "Oh, my poor brother," she murmured, her voice thick with a sorrow that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So brilliant, so troubled. We were estranged, yes, but he was still my blood. I always hoped." She let the sentence hang heavy with implied regret. Aria watched the performance with a kind of detached disgust. She knew the stories about Silas. Nathaniel had told her how Genevieve despised her brother for his common tastes, his refusal to play the social games she held so dear, and most of all for being vastly incomprehensibly wealthier than she was. His death was not a tragedy to her. It was the prologue to an inheritance. "Well," Genevieve said, composing herself with remarkable speed. "Thank you for informing us in person, Mr. Finch. I assume you are here to discuss the arrangements and the reading of his will." She gestured vaguely towards the drawing room. "Perhaps we should sit." "That will be necessary," Mr. Finch agreed. "However, the primary reason for my visit this evening is to execute a specific codicil in Mr. Whitmore's final will and testament, a directive he was most insistent upon." "A directive?" Nathaniel asked, stepping forward. "What kind of directive?" Mr. Finch opened his leather briefcase. The metallic clicks of the latches echoed loudly in the silent hall. He withdrew a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with a heavy wax seal bearing a W. Mr. Whitmore stipulated that the contents of his will were to be read immediately upon notification of his passing to his next of kin. He was specific about the timing. He wanted no delay for speculation or legal maneuvering. Mr. Finch's eyes scanned the small group. "My instructions are to read the dispositive provisions of the will in the presence of his sister Genevieve Harrington and his nephew Nathaniel Harrington." His gaze then moved and settled firmly on Aria, who had been slowly backing towards the door, wanting nothing more than to escape this bizarre funereal theater. "And also," Mr. Finch continued, his voice clear and unwavering, "in the presence of Ms. Aria Jensen." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Aria froze her hand halfway to the doorknob. I think you're mistaken. I never met Mr. Whitmore." Genevieve let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. "This is absurd. She has nothing to do with our family. She is a stranger, a former relation. She was just leaving." "I am not mistaken," Mr. Finch said, his gaze fixed on Aria with a new, almost gentle intensity. Mr. Whitmore was exceptionally clear. His exact words were, "Ensure Aria Jensen is present. She most of all needs to hear this. Please, Ms. Jensen, it would be best if you stayed." A cold dread mixed with a bewildering curiosity washed over Aria. What was happening? How could a man she'd never met, a reclusive billionaire, even know her name? Beatrice, sensing a shift in the power dynamic she couldn't comprehend, stepped forward. "This is a private family matter. Surely you can see this woman has no place here." "On the contrary," Mr. Finch replied, his voice taking on a steely edge as he looked at Beatrice. "According to this document, which I assure you is legally unassailable, Ms. Jensen's place here is more relevant than anyone else's. Now, if you would all be so kind as to proceed to the drawing room, we can begin." He gestured with the envelope. It was not a request. It was a command. Shell-shocked Aria found herself being ushered not out the door but deeper into the heart of the mansion she had just been so desperate to flee. Genevieve was radiating pure fury, her face pale with rage. Nathaniel looked utterly bewildered. As they walked back into the drawing room, the room where she had been so coldly received just minutes earlier, Aria felt a strange sense of unreality. The perfectly arranged dinner, the insult of the small table, it all seemed to belong to a different lifetime. Something was about to break wide open, and for the first time that night, she wasn't afraid. They sat in the drawing room, a tableau of tense, unwilling participants. Genevieve took her usual wingback chair by the fire, her posture rigid with indignation. Nathaniel and Beatrice sat together on a love seat, Beatrice clinging to his arm, as if to physically tether him to her world. Mr. Finch had calmly directed Aria to a plush armchair opposite Genevieve, a seat of equal status, an implicit rebalancing of the room's power dynamic that did not go unnoticed by the matriarch. Mr. Finch stood before the fireplace, the thick envelope in his hands. He carefully broke the wax seal with a small silver letter opener he produced from his briefcase. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the room. "Before I begin," he said, looking at each of them in turn, "I want it on record that I am fulfilling the explicit notarized and video-recorded instructions of my late client, Silas Whitmore." His mind was sharp and his intentions were crystal clear until the very end. This was a preemptive strike against the challenge of an unsound mind, and everyone knew it. Genevieve sniffed. "Get on with it, man." Mr. Finch adjusted his glasses and pulled out a multi-page document. He cleared his throat. "I, Silas Cormac Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." He skipped through the preliminary legal jargon, his voice a calm monotone. "To my longtime staff and household employees, I bequeath generous pensions and severance packages as detailed in Appendix A, in gratitude for their loyal service." He paused. "To my nephew, Nathaniel Harrington." Nathaniel sat up straighter, his eyes wide. Beatrice squeezed his arm, a greedy glint in her eyes. "I leave the sum of $100,000, Mr. Finch read. The amount was so shockingly small, so paltry in the context of a multi-billion-dollar fortune, that it was a profound insult. It was a tip, not an inheritance. Nathaniel's face fell a look of utter bewilderment washing over him. Beatrice's perfectly made-up face contorted in disbelief. Mr. Finch continued reading Silas's words. "Nathaniel, I had hoped you might possess some of the independent spirit that our family once had. Instead, you have allowed your mother to mold you into a spineless accessory for her social ambitions. This sum is precisely what you asked me for as a graduation gift years ago to buy a sports car. I am giving it to you again. Perhaps this time you will use it to buy a backbone." It is, I am told, a much more worthwhile investment." The color drained from Nathaniel's face. The public shaming delivered from beyond the grave was devastating. He shrank into the love seat, avoiding everyone's eyes. Genevieve's lips were a thin white line of fury. "And what did my brilliant brother leave for his only sister?" she asked, her voice dripping with acid. Mr. Finch turned a page. "To my sister, Genevieve Harrington." He paused, and for a moment Genevieve's expression softened with avaricious hope. "I leave my collection of 18th-century porcelain bedpans, which I have stored in the east wing of my Geneva estate. There are 12 of them, all in pristine condition. I trust she will find a prominent place to display them, as they are a perfect reflection of the value I place on her opinion and her character." A choked gasp escaped Beatrice. Aria had to physically restrain herself from laughing out loud. Porcelain bedpans. It was the most eloquent, vicious, and frankly hilarious insult she had ever heard. Genevieve rose from her chair, her body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. "This is a farce. A joke." He was senile insane. "I will contest this. I will have this entire travesty thrown out of court. I would advise against that." "Mrs. Harrington," Mr. Finch said calmly, not looking up from the document. "As I mentioned, the signing was recorded. Mr. Whitmore was evaluated by 3 separate geriatric psychiatrists in the week leading up to the signing. He was, in their expert opinion, possessed of a formidable and uniquely lucid intellect. Contesting this will would only result in public humiliation and staggering legal fees, which, I might add, you will have to pay for yourself." He looked up, his gaze steady. "Now, if you will please sit down, I must read the final and most significant provision of the will." Shaking, Genevieve slowly sank back into her chair, defeated. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a simmering, impotent hatred. Mr. Finch took a deep breath. "All the rest residue and remainder of my estate, including all real and personal property wherever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath as follows." He looked directly at Aria, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "My entire controlling interest in Whitmore Innovations. My portfolio of global equities and municipal bonds currently managed by Goldman Sachs in Zurich. My complete art collection, including works by Rothko, de Kooning, and a late-period Monet I acquired last year. My properties in Geneva, London, Kyoto, and my penthouse apartment on Central Park West in New York City. My charitable foundation with its $3 billion endowment. Everything. I leave it all in its entirety without condition or reservation to Ms. Aria Jensen." Silence. A profound, echoing, heart-stopping silence. Aria stared at Mr. Finch. The words didn't make sense. It was as if he were speaking a foreign language. Her mind simply refused to process the information. Whitmore Innovations. Rothko. A penthouse. It was a catalog of a life so far removed from her own that it felt like fiction. Then the silence was shattered. "No!" It was a primal scream torn from Genevieve's throat. "It's impossible. It's a lie. She doesn't even know him." Beatrice was staring at Aria with a look of pure, unadulterated horror, as if Aria had suddenly sprouted horns and a tail. Nathaniel was gaping, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, the insult of his own meager inheritance now completely eclipsed by this world-shattering revelation. Aria finally found her voice, a small trembling whisper. "Why, I don't understand. Why me?" Mr. Finch turned another page, his expression softening. He read the final passage from Silas Whitmore's will, a personal addendum. "To Ms. Aria Jensen. You and I have never met, and for that I am sorry. But I have known you for years. Your maternal grandfather, Robert Miller, the librarian, was my dearest friend in college. He was a man of integrity and intellect, qualities my own family sorely lacks. He spoke of you often in his letters before he passed, of your passion and your talent. When my sister brought her son home with a new wife, an artist, I was intrigued. I made it my business to learn about you." Aria's mind reeled. Her grandpa Robert, who had passed away when she was 19, had been friends with a secret billionaire. I saw how my sister and her family treated you. Mr. Finch continued reading. They saw your art as a hobby, your spirit as a defect. They tried to sand down your edges to make you fit into their smooth, polished, empty world. They failed. I have followed your career anonymously. I have purchased several of your early works through a proxy agent. I have 3 of your canvases hanging in my private study in Geneva. They are vibrant and honest and full of the soul this family has spent generations trying to expunge from its bloodline. Tears began to stream down Aria's face. Someone had seen her. All this time when she felt invisible and worthless, a powerful unseen force in the world had seen her and valued her. This fortune is a heavy burden, the will concluded. It is a tool that can create or destroy. In the hands of my sister it would become a weapon of social cruelty. In your hands I hope it will be a medium like your paints to create something beautiful and meaningful. My old friend Robert would have been proud of the woman you've become. Do not let them diminish you ever again. This is not a gift, Ms. Jensen. It is a restoration. It is the power they tried to take from you returned a billionfold. Use it well. Mr. Finch folded the paper. The reading was over. The room was a maelstrom of shock and fury. Genevieve was hyperventilating. Beatrice was whispering frantically in Nathaniel's ear. Aria just sat there, the sound of her grandfather's name and the impossible life-altering words of a dead man echoing in her head. She was no longer Aria Jensen, the struggling artist, the scorned ex-wife. She was the inheritor, a billionaire. And her life as she knew it had just ended and been reborn in the space of 5 minutes. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was chaos. The drawing room, once a symbol of rigid control and icy decorum, devolved into a scene of raw, ugly emotion. Genevieve Harrington was the first to completely unravel. Her face, usually a carefully composed mask of aristocratic hauteur, was mottled with red, her eyes wild with a fury that bordered on madness. "This is theft," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Aria. She manipulated him. My brother was a lonely old man, and this social climbing parasite must have somehow preyed on his senility. Mrs. Harrington. Mr. Finch interjected, his voice a pillar of calm in the hurricane. As the will clearly stated, Mr. Whitmore and Ms. Jensen never met. Any attempt to slander Ms. Jensen with such baseless accusations will be met with the full legal force of the Whitmore estate, which I must remind you is now at Ms. Jensen's disposal. The threat was clear and immediate. Genevieve, for the first time in her life, was on the wrong side of a power imbalance. The legal arsenal she was used to wielding against others was now aimed squarely at her. The realization seemed to suck the air from her lungs. She collapsed back into her chair, not with a sense of defeat, but with the dawning horror of utter annihilation. Her world, built on a foundation of lineage and wealth, had just been demolished by the ghost of her brother and a woman she had tried to humiliate with a small table. Beatrice Vanderbilt, meanwhile, was engaged in a frantic, whispered conversation with Nathaniel. Aria could catch fragments of it. "Do something. Your inheritance. Our future. She can't just... You have to talk to her." Beatrice's panic was palpable. She had hitched her wagon to the Harrington name, believing it to be a rocket to the highest echelons of society. Suddenly that rocket looked like a lead balloon. The $100,000 inheritance was a public joke. The fiancée of Nathaniel Harrington was now a far less enviable position than it had been an hour ago. Her eyes darted towards Aria, and the condescending smirk she had worn all evening was replaced by a raw, desperate envy that was far uglier. But it was Nathaniel's reaction that truly captivated Aria. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time that night. The fog of his mother's influence and Beatrice's cloying presence seemed to momentarily clear from his eyes. He saw not the inconvenient ex-wife, but the woman who now held a power he couldn't even comprehend. And in his gaze she saw a sickening, dawning regret. It wasn't regret for how he had treated her, for his cowardice, for his cruelty. It was the regret of a man who had backed the wrong horse. He had traded a masterpiece for a forgery, and he was only just realizing his mistake. He finally stood up, untangling himself from Beatrice's grasp. He took a hesitant step towards Aria. Aria, he started, his voice thick with a new unctuous sincerity. Aria, I had no idea. My mother, This whole evening was her idea. The seating, all of it. It was monstrous. I should have stopped it. I'm so sorry. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to switch allegiances to realign himself with the new center of gravity in the room. He was trying to crawl back to her, but not to the woman he had divorced. He was crawling towards the fortune she now represented. Before Aria could even respond, Mr. Finch stepped between them, a subtle but impassable barrier. I believe Ms. Jensen has endured enough from this family for one evening, he said, his voice firm. He then turned to Aria, his expression softening with professional concern. Ms. Jensen, or perhaps I should say Ms. Whitmore, as my client also filed to have you named his successor and head of the Whitmore Foundation. You do not have to stay here a moment longer. I have a car waiting outside. It can take you wherever you need to go. I've also taken the liberty of securing a suite for you at the Carlisle. It seems more appropriate than your current residence. All expenses will of course be handled by the estate. The Carlisle, a legendary hotel synonymous with quiet old-world luxury. The contrast with her small drafty apartment was so stark it was dizzying. Aria felt a wave of vertigo. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock grief for a man she never knew, but who had inexplicably saved her, a wild bubbling sense of vindication, and a profound, terrifying uncertainty about the future. The only thing she knew for sure was that she had to get out of that house. She stood up her legs, feeling strangely unsteady. She looked at the three people who had tried to break her. Genevieve, now silent and ashen-faced. Beatrice, staring at her with undisguised hatred. And Nathaniel, his face a pathetic mask of pleading desperation. She didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. A screaming match would be beneath her now. A quiet exit was a far more powerful statement. She simply nodded at Mr. Finch. Yes, please. I'd like to leave. Of course, he said. He gathered his briefcase. I will be in contact with you tomorrow morning, Ms. Jensen, to begin the process. It will be extensive. For now, just rest. He guided her out of the drawing room. As they walked through the grand foyer past the disapproving portraits of the Harrington ancestors, Aria felt their painted eyes on her again. But this time she didn't feel their judgment. She felt their irrelevance. They were ghosts of a fallen house. At the front door she paused and looked back one last time. Nathaniel had followed them into the hall. Aria, wait, he called out, his voice cracking. Can we just talk? Aria met his gaze across the cold marble floor. She thought of the lonely little table by the fern. She thought of his silence as his mother and fiancé humiliated her. She thought of the 2 years she had struggled while he lived in this palace of indifference. And with all the newfound power of the Whitmore fortune behind her, she gave him her answer. She turned her back on him without a word and walked out the door into the cool night air and a life she could never have imagined. Mr. Finch held the door of a sleek black sedan open for her, and as she slid into the plush leather interior, she didn't look back. The great oak doors of the Harrington mansion closed with a quiet final thud. The suite at the Carlisle was larger than her entire apartment building. It was a world of soft lighting, muted colors, antique furniture, and silent, impeccable service. A bottle of vintage champagne was chilling in a silver bucket next to a bouquet of white orchids that must have cost more than her monthly grocery bill. From the windows, the lights of Manhattan glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Aria walked through the rooms, a living room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a cloud-like king-sized bed, a marble bathroom the size of her studio in a daze. She touched the silk curtains, ran her hand over a polished mahogany desk, and stared at her own reflection in a gilded mirror. The woman looking back at her was the same, yet everything was different. She was wearing the same teal dress, her armor from a battle she hadn't realized she was winning, but she felt like a stranger in her own skin. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the city that never sleeps, her mind racing. The scale of what had happened was too vast to comprehend. It wasn't just money, it was a legacy, a foundation, a global corporation. Aria Jensen, who worried about the rising cost of canvas, was now responsible for thousands of employees, for philanthropic endeavors, for an art collection that belonged in a museum. The name Silas Whitmore echoed in her thoughts. He had been her guardian angel, a secret patron who had watched her from afar. He hadn't just given her his fortune, he had given her his trust. He had seen something in her that the Harringtons had tried to extinguish. The weight of that trust felt heavier than the money. The next morning, Mr. Finch arrived not with a briefcase but with a team. There was a stern-looking woman from the bank in Zurich, a sharp young man who was the head of the Whitmore Foundation, and a kind-faced woman who was the chief financial officer of Whitmore Innovations. They sat with her in the suite's living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, and began to sketch the architecture of her new life. They spoke of stock portfolios, of board meetings, of philanthropic strategy, of asset management. They used terms like derivatives, endowments, and fiduciary duty. It was overwhelming, a torrent of information that threatened to drown her. But as they spoke, a strange thing happened. Aria listened. She asked questions. Timidly at first, then with growing confidence. The CFO, a woman named Ms. Davies, was explaining a complex investment in a sustainable energy startup. Aria, remembering an article she'd read, asked, "What's their strategy for battery life degradation?" That's the weak point for most of their competitors. The team exchanged surprised, impressed glances. Mr. Finch smiled faintly. They had expected a bewildered artist, an easy mark to be managed and guided. They hadn't expected a mind that was sharp, analytical, and used to seeing the hidden structures beneath the surface, the same skill she used to compose a painting. For the first time since walking into the Harrington mansion, Aria felt a flicker of her old self. This massive, intimidating fortune was just another system, another composition. It was complex, yes, but it could be understood. It could be shaped. Her phone, a simple smartphone with a cracked screen, buzzed on the table. She had forgotten about it completely. The screen lit up with a name she had deleted but not forgotten, Nathaniel. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. A string of text messages followed. "Aria, please. We need to talk. I've made a terrible mistake. My mother is... She's not herself. You've destroyed her. Beatrice and I were over. I ended it. It was always you. I love you. I never stopped." The messages were a pathetic, desperate volley of manipulation. He was trying every angle: guilt, pity, feigned romance. 2 days ago, those words might have shattered her. Now they were just pathetic. He wasn't mourning the loss of her. He was mourning the loss of his access to her newfound power. She picked up the phone. The team fell silent, watching her. She looked at the screen, at the name of the man who had stood by and watched her be humiliated. She pressed her thumb to the screen, held it down over his contact, and a single word appeared. Block. She put the phone back down. "You were saying, Miss Davies?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "About the long-term capital growth strategy." A smile touched Ms. Davies' lips. "Of course, Ms. Jensen." The meeting continued for hours. They arranged for a new phone, a new security detail. A necessity, I'm afraid. Mr. Finch had insisted, and a new wardrobe. Aria initially balked at that, but Mr. Finch put it gently. "Ms. Jensen, you are now the public face of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Your appearance is a statement. Let it be your own, but let it be one of strength." Later that afternoon, after the team had left, Aria was alone again in the silent suite. She walked over to the desk where a fresh notepad and a pen had been placed. She picked up the pen, and for the first time in days, she sketched. She didn't draw the city skyline or the lavish furniture. She drew a small round table sitting alone in the corner of a grand room. Then she drew a massive, powerful wave, rising up from the floor, lifting the small table up, until it towered over a much larger, now dwarfed dining table, which was beginning to crack and splinter under the pressure. She looked at the sketch and smiled. Silas Whitmore had not just given her a fortune. He had given her a voice, a platform, a megaphone for the roar that had been building inside her for years. And she was finally ready to use it. A month passed. It was a month of dizzying transformation. Aria moved out of the Carlisle and into Silas Whitmore's penthouse on Central Park West. The apartment was surprisingly modern and filled not with ostentatious displays of wealth, but with books and art. Her 3 paintings hung in his private library, a place of honor among the masters. Seeing them there felt like coming home. She spent her days in boardrooms on conference calls with Geneva and in deep-dive sessions with the heads of the Whitmore Foundation. She learned about gene sequencing technology funded by Whitmore Innovations and about clean water projects in sub-Saharan Africa funded by the Foundation. The world Silas had built was not just a monument to wealth. It was an engine for change, and she was now at the controls. She hired Chloe, her sculptor friend, to be a consultant for the Foundation's arts endowment, giving her a 6-figure salary and a mandate to find and fund brilliant, struggling artists, the kind of artist Aria herself had been just weeks ago. The Harringtons, after their initial desperate calls, had gone silent. Aria knew through Mr. Finch's quiet intelligence gathering that their world was imploding. The story of the will reading had, of course, leaked. The tale of Genevieve's porcelain bedpans and Nathaniel's paltry backbone fund became a delicious piece of gossip, whispered at every benefit and country club in the tri-state area. Harrington Global's stock took a hit, not because of any financial instability, but because the family at its head had been exposed as laughably weak and cruel. They had lost their most valuable asset, their mystique. Aria knew she needed one final interaction to truly close the chapter. Revenge was not her goal. She didn't need to crush them. They were doing a fine job of that themselves. What she needed was to rewrite the ending of their story on her own terms. The opportunity came in the form of the annual New York Arts Benefactor Gala, the absolute pinnacle of the city's philanthropic social scene. For years, the highlight of the gala was the keynote speech and lead donation, always given by a Harrington. It was their stage, their crown jewel of social dominance. This year, however, the gala committee had a new, much more appealing benefactor. Aria arrived not in a borrowed dress, but in a custom-made gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the lights. It was a statement of power, elegance, and artistry. She wore a simple diamond necklace that had belonged to Silas Whitmore's mother, a piece from a different, kinder side of the family. As she entered the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Flashes went off. Whispers followed her. She was no longer an outsider. She was the new sun around which this entire solar system now orbited. She saw them across the room. Genevieve, Nathaniel, and a new, steely-looking woman Aria assumed was a lawyer. They were huddled near a service entrance, looking like ghosts at a feast. Genevieve had aged a decade in a month. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. Nathaniel looked lost, a boy in a man's suit. They were pariahs in the room they used to own. Later in the evening, the host took the stage, and now he announced, his voice booming, "It is my distinct honor to introduce the new chair of the Whitmore Foundation and this year's lead benefactor, a true champion of the arts, Ms. Aria Jensen." Aria walked to the podium amidst thunderous applause. She looked out at the sea of faces, the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city, and then her eyes found the Harringtons. Genevieve was staring at her with a look of pure, venomous hatred. Aria smiled faintly and began to speak. She didn't talk about stocks or business. She talked about art. She talked about what it feels like to be a young artist struggling to buy paint, about the power of a single image to change a person's perspective. True value. She said, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the ballroom, is not something that can be tallied on a balance sheet or inherited through a name. It is not found in the cold marble of a grand house, but in the fire of human creativity. It is the dignity of a person who creates something beautiful out of nothing. Her eyes swept over Genevieve. There are those who believe art is a frivolous hobby, that a person's worth is measured by their pedigree. They seek to build walls around their world to keep out anything and anyone they deem unworthy. They curate their lives like a museum full of beautiful, expensive, and ultimately lifeless objects. But a life without fresh vision, without passion, without the messy, unpredictable beauty of art is not a life. It is a tomb. She then announced the Whitmore Foundation's new initiative, a $50 million grant to provide studio spaces and living stipends for emerging artists in the city. It was a revolutionary sum that would change the lives of hundreds. The room erupted in a standing ovation. As the applause washed over her, she looked at the Harringtons one last time. Nathaniel was looking at the floor, shame written all over his face. Genevieve, however, was still staring at her. For a moment their eyes locked. In that gaze, Aria saw no remorse, no understanding, only the bitter, impotent rage of a queen who had been checkmated. And Aria felt nothing. No anger, no desire for revenge, not even pity. They were simply irrelevant. A footnote in the first chapter of a much larger, more interesting book. She finished her speech and walked off the stage, not looking their way again. People rushed to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to be near the new gravitational center of their world. She was gracious, she was poised, she was in control. Later, as she was leaving the gala, her car waiting, she saw a piece of art being auctioned in the lobby. It was a small, vibrant, abstract piece. The artist's name was unfamiliar. The bidding was slow. The piece was about to be sold for a pittance. Aria raised her hand. $1 million, she said, her voice carrying across the lobby. A gasp went through the crowd. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. Sold, he finally stammered, to Ms. Aria Jensen. She had Mr. Finch's team find the young artist and tell him the news. She knew what that money, that validation would mean. It was a life-changing act of patronage. It was what Silas Whitmore had done for her. As she got into her car and drove away, leaving the glittering gala behind, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had not just inherited a fortune, she had inherited a purpose. The Harringtons had tried to deny her a seat at their table. Now she was building 1,000 new tables for 1,000 new artists and inviting everyone to have a seat. And in doing so, she had found the one thing money could never buy: true and absolute freedom. Aria Jensen's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by those who try to diminish us. It's not defined by a last name, a bank account, or a seat at a dinner table. True value lies in our integrity, our passion, and the quiet dignity with which we face our darkest moments. The Harringtons believed power was their birthright, but they learned that karma sometimes is delivered not by fate, but by a lawyer with a briefcase and the last will of a man who valued soul over status. Aria's journey from a scorned ex-wife to a philanthropic powerhouse shows that the ultimate victory isn't revenge. It's building a better world than the one that tried to break you. If you were moved by Aria's incredible story of justice and vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories of unbelievable twists of fate. What would you have done in Aria's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.